I counted 11 hands in the air before I stopped counting. My father-in-law's hand was the first one up, which somehow hurt more than my mother-in-law's. I sat at the end of that table. In the dining room, I had personally written a check to renovate 4 years ago, and I watched the people who shared my last name vote on whether I deserved to keep showing up to Christmas. They called it a family conversation. They called it healthy boundaries. What it actually was 11 people deciding I was disposable, and not one of them looking me in the eye while they did it. I didn't argue. I didn't push my chair back. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and said the only thing I had energy for: understood. Before I tell you what showed up in their mailboxes 9 days later, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to teach people what happens when they underestimate the quiet one. My name is Renata Okafor Hale, and I'm 38 years old. I'm a healthcare compliance attorney based just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of job where my entire career depends on knowing exactly which rules people think don't apply to them, and proving, on paper, that they do. I review hospital systems for fraud. I have walked into boardrooms and ended careers with a single page of documentation. I am, by every account from the people who actually know me, terrifyingly calm under pressure. My husband Daniel used to joke that I had two settings, warm and discovery phase, and that the second one should come with a warning label. I am telling you that about myself now, because you need to understand it before I tell you what happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, at a family meeting I didn't know was a trial until I was already being sentenced. Daniel passed away 19 months earlier. An aneurysm, no warning, no goodbye, just a phone call from his sister while I was in a deposition that I will never fully come back from hearing. We had been married for 6 years. We had a daughter, Imani, who was 4 at the time and is 6 now, and who still asks me some nights if Daddy can see her from where he is. Daniel's family, the Hales, are old Charlotte money, the kind that doesn't talk about money because they've never had to. His father, Gregory Hale, built a chain of upscale southern restaurants called Magnolia Row that has locations across 3 states, white tablecloths, a wine list that requires its own laminated booklet, the kind of place where local news anchors get photographed on their birthdays. His mother, Vivian Hale, sits on the board of 2 charities and the altar guild of the largest Episcopal church in the city, and she has never once, in the 9 years I knew her, called me anything other than Daniel's wife in front of other people, even after I had his last name hyphenated onto mine. From the very beginning, Vivian made her opinion of me clear without ever saying a cruel word out loud, because cruelty, when you're raised the way she was raised, doesn't need volume. It needs timing. She introduced me at her Christmas parties as the lawyer Daniel found, like I was a stray he'd brought home. She corrected my grammar at dinner in front of guests. She once told me, very sweetly, over sweet tea on her back porch, that she always thought Daniel with someone a little softer. I am Nigerian American on my mother's side, raised in Durham's by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to put me through Duke and then through law school at UNC, and I have spent my entire adult life being underestimated by people who mistake quiet for small. Vivian Hale made that mistake for 9 years. She was about to make it one more time, in front of everyone, on the worst possible day. The meeting happened at the Hale family lake house outside Lake Norman, the weekend after what would have been Daniel's 40th birthday. Vivian called it a family check-in. I should have known something was wrong when she specifically asked me to leave Imani with the babysitter, when normally she insisted my daughter come to everything, mostly so she could parade her around as proof of the Hale bloodline continuing. I drove out there alone, past the dock where Daniel taught Imani to fish 2 summers before he died, and I walked into a living room that had clearly been arranged ahead of time. 11 chairs in a half circle, 1 chair slightly apart, slightly smaller for me. Gregory spoke first, which told me everything, because Gregory never speaks first about anything that involves emotion. He said the family had been discussing some concerns. He said that since Daniel passed, there had been tension, that some members of the family felt I had become difficult to be around, that my presence at gatherings had started to feel, in his words, complicated. Vivian picked it up from there, her voice doing that thing it does, sweet and slow like she was reading a eulogy instead of ending someone's place in a family. She said that several relatives had expressed discomfort. She said that perhaps it would be healthier, for everyone including me, if I stepped back from family events going forward. Holidays, birthdays, the annual 4th of July thing at the lake house that Imani had been going to since she was an infant, She said this while looking directly at a spot just above my left shoulder, the way people look at you when they've decided you're already gone. Then she said the word that I will remember until the day I die. She said, "I'd like us to vote on it so it's clear this isn't just me." 11 hands went up. Cousins I had hosted Thanksgiving for, an aunt I had driven to chemotherapy appointments the year before, twice a week for 4 months, because her own children worked too far away. Gregory's hand went up second, right after Vivian's, and he didn't even pretend to think about it. The only person in that room who didn't raise their hand was Daniel's younger brother Marcus, who looked physically ill and stared at the floor the entire time. 11 hands in a room paid for in part by a foundation I had quietly helped Daniel set up years earlier. A foundation that, as it happened, still legally controlled certain assets nobody in that room had bothered to read the paperwork on. I want to tell you I felt rage in that moment. I didn't. What I felt was something colder and far more familiar. The exact sensation I get in a deposition when a hospital administrator finally says the thing that proves the fraud, the moment the case stops being a theory and becomes a fact I can build a file around. I looked at 11 raised hands, and somewhere underneath the grief, a part of my brain that had been trained for 15 years to find leverage in chaos simply switched on. I thanked everyone for their honesty. I told Vivian I appreciated the family taking the time to be transparent with me. I picked up my purse, walked out to my car, and sat in the driveway for exactly 4 minutes before I started making phone calls. Here is the thing none of them knew, because none of them had ever asked, because asking would have required treating me as someone worth understanding, instead of someone to be managed. When Daniel and I got married, his father had set up what the family casually called the Kids Trust, a relatively modest fund meant to help young Hale relatives with tuition and first homes. What almost nobody remembered because it had happened in a lawyer's office a decade earlier and everyone had simply moved on with their lives, was that Daniel and I, as a married couple, had been named co-trustees of that fund alongside Gregory, specifically so that there would always be at least one trustee from outside the immediate bloodline. Gregory's own words, meant at the time as a gesture of trust toward me. When Daniel died, his trustee position didn't disappear. Under the language of the trust, it passed to his surviving spouse, to me. Nobody in that family had ever bothered to actually read the document, because why would they? When the woman holding that authority was just Daniel's wife, someone they just voted out of their lives for being inconvenient. I drove home that night and didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with Amani's nightlight glowing down the hallway, and I pulled every piece of paperwork I had related to that trust, related to Magnolia Row's corporate structure, related to 3 properties the family held jointly that I happen to know. Because I am a compliance attorney and reading documents is what I do for a living, had not been properly refiled after a restructuring 6 years earlier. I am not going to pretend what I did next was about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the fact that a room full of people I had fed, driven to appointments, and stayed loyal to through the worst year of my life had decided, with a show of hands, that I was disposable, and they had done it without once imagining I might still hold a key to the house they were locking me out of. Over the next 6 days I worked quietly, the way I always work, which is to say invisibly until the moment it matters. I contacted the Trust's outside counsel, a firm Gregory had used for over a decade and trusted implicitly, and I formally exercised my rights as co-trustee to request a full audit of fund disbursements going back 5 years. I did this not out of suspicion, although the suspicion turned out to be well earned, but because it was my legal right, and because audits, once requested, cannot simply be undone by an uncomfortable family vote. What the audit found, within 72 hours, was that roughly $210,000 in trust funds, money meant for tuition and first homes for young relatives, had been quietly redirected over the years to cover renovation costs at the lake house, 2 of Vivian's charity gala deposits that were never reimbursed, and a marketing consulting fee paid to a company that, when I looked it up, was registered to Vivian's sister. None of it had been formally approved by all trustees. None of it had been disclosed to the family members the fund was actually meant for. I also reached out separately to the property management firm overseeing the Lake Norman house because, as it turned out, that house, the one where I had just been voted out of a family, sat on land that was jointly held under an LLC that listed Daniel and me, not Gregory and Vivian, as the majority controlling members, a structure set up years earlier for tax reasons that Gregory's old accountant had recommended and then forgotten to update when Daniel passed. I want to be very clear because I know how this sounds. I did not invent any of this. I did not manufacture leverage out of thin air. I simply, for the first time in 9 years, stopped being polite about what I already legally had the right to know and to use. On the ninth day, 3 things arrived at the Hale family by certified mail, all on the same Friday afternoon, the same day Vivian was hosting her quarterly Episcopal Guild luncheon, which I had not planned, but did not exactly mind either. The first was formal notice from the trust's law firm that, as a result of the audit I had requested, the trust was freezing further disbursements pending review, and that the firm was required, under fiduciary duty law in North Carolina, to notify the state regarding potential breach of trust obligations. The second was a letter regarding the LLC that held the lake house, informing all members that as majority controlling interest, I was formally requesting a member vote on the property's future, including the option to sell, a vote my legal position meant I could not be outvoted on without my consent. The third letter went to Gregory directly, from me, not through a lawyer, handwritten, because some things deserve a human hand and not a letterhead. I told him I had been thinking about what Vivian said, about how the family wanted clarity going forward. I told him I agreed completely. I told him I thought it was time everyone had real clarity about who actually held what, on paper, in this family, and that I looked forward to discussing it whenever he and the rest of the 11 were ready. The phone calls started within the hour. Gregory first, his voice doing something I had genuinely never heard it do before, which was shake. He asked if there had been some kind of misunderstanding. I told him calmly, the way I tell hospital administrators that their billing department has a problem, that there was no misunderstanding at all, that the documents were the documents, and that I would of course be happy to walk through everything with the trust's counsel present, since transparency seemed to be something the family valued now. Vivian called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail, not out of cruelty, but because I genuinely had nothing to say to her yet that wouldn't have come out sharper than I wanted it to in that moment, and I have spent my whole career learning that the person who speaks last calmly wins the room. The cousins called too, the ones whose tuition money had quietly vanished into a lake house deck renovation. One of them, my husband's youngest cousin, Cassidy, who was about to start her second year of nursing school and had been told the trust just didn't have funds available right now for her spring semester, called me crying, not angry at me at all, but devastated. Because she had voted that day at the lake house too, her hand had gone up with the others, and now she understood exactly what she had been protecting when she did it, and exactly what it had cost her. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think you deserve the honest version, and not the satisfying movie version. I did not destroy the Hale family. I did not bankrupt them, did not send anyone to prison, did not stand in a doorway delivering a monologue while violins played. What I did was much smaller and much more permanent than that. I removed the illusion that I was powerless in that family, an illusion 11 people had been comfortable living inside for 9 years, because it was convenient and because grief had made me, in their eyes, finally easy to discard. The trust audit led to a formal repayment plan, supervised by outside counsel, that Gregory and Vivian are still working through, money slowly being restored to the cousins it was always meant for, Cassidy's tuition among the first payments processed. The lake house was not sold. I never actually wanted to sell it. Imani has too many memories of her father there. But I did exercise my right as majority member to formally remove Vivian's name as the property's primary host of record for family events, a small, almost bureaucratic-sounding change that meant practically that she could no longer unilaterally decide who was and was not welcome on that land, which meant practically that the next 4th of July I was there, with Imani, on the dock. Nobody voted on it. Gregory called me 11 days after the letters went out, alone this time, no Vivian on the line, and said something I think about often. He said he hadn't realized how much of what his family ran on was built on people simply not reading the paperwork, including him. He apologized, not eloquently, men like Gregory rarely do it eloquently, but he apologized and he asked, almost sheepishly, if I would consider staying on as trustee going forward given everything. I told him I already was the trustee, that this had never actually been a question, and that the only real question left was whether the rest of the family wanted to keep pretending otherwise. Vivian and I have not had a real conversation since that day. We exist now in the careful civil distance of 2 people who understand exactly what the other one is capable of, which honestly is the most respect I think she has ever shown me. She still attends the same church. The congregation, I'm told, eventually heard at least some version of where Cassidy's tuition money had actually gone, because in a town like ours, certain kinds of news travel through choir practice faster than any lawyer's letter ever could. Last month, Imani asked me, completely out of nowhere while I was braiding her hair before bed, why we still go to the lake house if Grandma Vivian doesn't like us very much. I told her the truth, the simplified version a 6-year-old can hold. I told her that the lake belongs to her daddy's memory just as much as it belongs to anyone else, and that nobody gets to vote a person out of their own family's love. Not really, not in any way that actually matters, no matter how many hands they manage to raise in a room. She thought about that for a while, the way she does, her father's same slow, careful blink, and then she asked if we could go fishing there again this summer. I told her yes. I told her we would be the ones deciding the guest list this time.